Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. We're back again for another interview. This time we're continuing on our kind of health series as Create Your Best You, part of the whole picture of things. And I've got beautiful Brandi MacDonald with me today. And I'm so blessed to have this extremely busy lady take time out in her schedule for us today. So I met Brandi several years ago at the UCA, which is a chiropractic conference that takes place in Birmingham every year. So Brandi and her husband, Dawn, who's a chiropractor. Brandi is co-owner and manager and practice manager, CA, chiropractic assistant at their practice in Southside in Edmonton, Canada, and co-creator of the Vitality Shift, which is a program for chiropractors to help kind of grow and expand and help more people. International speaker, published author.
So the list goes on and on.
Very accomplished, amazing lady who's going to just share a few things with us today. And I'm going to start with sharing the screen because this might explain where we're going to everybody's watching. So there we go. So I was on Facebook following Brandi, as I do, because I absolutely love the enormous posts that you do. And these two struck me really hard, and not just personally from my own journey, but also in the journeys I take with our practice members and our friends and our family. You can't heal a body that you hate, and the idea that looking after yourself first is a great act of rebellion. And those two posts were just so enormously powerful in terms of health and healing and basic well-being for people. And I just thought I would just love to pick your brains and talk more about it.
My enormous post, I love it. I said I needed a special page just for Maryellen to share my posts with. They are enormous. I do write a lot. Every morning I get up and I write on Facebook, mostly the chiropractors and their staff. And I just sort of write whatever comes to me or whatever's happened in our practice or with the people that we're working with. And this last year, I think in particular for all of us around the world, where I'm in Canada, obviously, but it's very similar to the UK in how our restrictions have rolled out and what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. And we've just really seen a world now. I mean, we've been in practice 22 years. Prior to that, I was a social worker, and never in the history of my career of working with advocating better people have I ever seen some of the trauma that I've seen in the last year for people as far as their healing barriers. I think the last year is really, you probably see that too in practice. The last year has really been such a dramatic shift for people because there's such a sense of uncertainty and there's such a sense of fear, I think, for what the future will bring because we just don't know. And that has really created an entire community of people that we see in our practice that just feel hopeless. And I think that is really the crux of that. I didn't write that little meme. I always find people who are much more eloquent than I am when I put a meme up. So I found that meme written by, I think, a social worker or psychologist, particularly as it related to body image. But I thought it was such a powerful, very short version of what I was attempting to say, in the sense that a lot of people, I think we find them unable to heal because they are hopeless about their ability, particularly if you're in a chronic pain pattern or a chronic disease pattern. It feels like your body has betrayed you. And as soon as you feel betrayed, you start to hate things about your body. And I see that, I really see that this last year with people, especially with a lot of our chronically ill people who have been really afraid, as they should be, to get a virus and not be able to really handle it the way our body should be able to handle it. And I think that hate or betrayal, body betrayal feeling that we have is probably the biggest barrier to our ability to fully heal, not just feel better, but I think for people to express themselves beyond their problem and into their life and how they view the world. And because we can't get past that and we don't talk about it, and we just sort of hope that people's pieces of their body kind of get better. And as their pieces of their body get better, maybe they'll get better. But the big piece that's missing, I think, is that psychological piece that if we feel betrayed by our body or betrayed by a disease or betrayed by the pain that our body is experiencing, then we start to hate ourselves. And that really is the depth, I think, that we need to go to, particularly after this past year, and really have conversations around so that people can really step into their healing process.
Yeah. And that's a huge thing, isn't it? Yeah. This year has been massive for that, and it's
Mm.
interesting. I mean, our office, we've taken a lot of measures to not be over the top while following the guidelines. So there's no big scary signs. There's no big, all of that kind of stuff. There's no big lines on the road and, arrows and things like that, because we trust people. We know they're
Mhm.
grown ups. They know their capabilities. They know what makes them feel safe, and obviously we're still having to wear PPE and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting that, people come in and you can just see them go, oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And I think when we look at self, so that post to sort of the bigger idea behind that particular meme is something called self-loathing. And when we look at somebody's inability to do that, so if you just think about your own life and you just think about how often do you ever just go, like for most people, it's like never. If I were to ask people that, and I do, because that's what I do, I would ask people, they don't actually even know how much tension they're holding in their body around that. Like, it's never going to get better. What's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know what's going to happen. Right. And so they're in that perpetual kind of routine, like habit. And it becomes a habit in the body of just constantly being in that state of fear and lack of safety, that is really easy then to think that the body's not working for you. It's actually working against you. And I think that is the biggest component of healing that we are not able to express very well to people, because we think that the body is working against us. So if something breaks, or it's not working, or we're not healing as quickly as we want to, or the pain is still there, or we're hurtling towards an autoimmune disorder, we actually think that something is happening to us, and we don't really realize it's happening because of us. And there's this really big difference between somebody's fault and somebody's responsibility. And it's never anybody's fault that they're chronically ill, or that they're in a chronic pain pattern. That's never somebody's fault. However, there is a responsibility to that, to understand that the body is always just making the best decision it can in the moment of time of it making the decision.
Mhm.
And that's really, you'll find this, I know you know this in practice, that's so hard for people to wrap their brain around, because they've been conditioned, as have we, if we're in any kind of healing profession, to believe that the body breaks and we fix it. Like that's what we're conditioned to believe, that it gets broken, and like a mechanic, we just have like this little wrench and lug nut and we stick it in there, and then whoop, the body fixes itself. But it doesn't really work that way. The body's always making actually really brilliant decisions, even if we don't understand them.
Yeah.
And it's because of that missing link, we start to loathe the way in which our body works. And then the bigger thing on that is we loathe then how we look, and we confuse body image with self-image. And then we've got all this kind of messy pot of ick that really is the problem with somebody really stepping into not just feeling better, but healing.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? The healing side of things. And it's interesting because the body has a hierarchy that I've noticed over years of practice, that, somebody might come in with a condition, and this condition seems really slow to shift, but all these other underlying things, so all the like little pillars that are holding up the creation of that condition, begin to crumble first, because the body, even on a cellular level, or rather than an overt symptomatic level, has a hierarchy that even I can't always predict, but I know it's going to happen, right? So that
Totally.
time and healing working together and not working against yourself,
Right. And I think a lot of people, if you, in your practice, we have a lot of people prior to doing this, I worked a lot in chronic pain recovery with folks, particularly women who had social addictive issues and lots of trauma in their past. And a lot of chronic trauma in the body is related to chronic pain syndrome. So if somebody is in this looped pattern where the brain is just constantly reflexively telling the body, you're in danger, you're in danger, you're in danger. And that hierarchy, that biological hierarchy, which I'm always saying to our patients, we call them practice members or people that are in our practice, I'm always saying, like from the perspective of understanding just the law, the laws of the human body. The hierarchy of survival is actually quite stunning. It's stunning. I know it's not stunning for you when you feel horrible, and those of us that have gone through a chronic disease, and I'm one of them, it's not awesome in the time. But looking back on it, it's stunning to really look at what the body is capable to do to keep you moving through life. To keep you moving through life and to keep you upright in gravity and to allow you to get your career and have your children and your marriages and your houses and your cars. And it's always doing what it needs to do to keep you moving, which I always think is just stunningly brilliant. Now, of course, it's not stunningly brilliant to be in pain or feel horrible, but when you understand that there's always that hierarchy there, you start to appreciate the body's doing all of these things. And if we were to shift just a little bit, we were to shift sort of our response, we were to shift the way we think about it, we were to shift the way we can access what the body feels like before it's totally all broken down and we're limping in, getting help, or kind of in that end stage of the dyshyphonesis process, which we call where the body's really starting to break down. We can kind of step into that. All of a sudden, the brain starts to make different decisions. And that's what you see in chiropractic, we see in chiropractic, where we know when that body kind of calms, the brain kind of stops looking at everything as a threat. Then we go, oh, wait a second, that's wild. Now all of a sudden I'm sleeping better. How's that possible? Well, you can't sleep when the brain is reflexively telling you you're in danger. It just, you can't rest. And then all of a sudden people start resting, even though they feel horrible still. They go, weird, I like slept for 2 hours straight without waking up, or I slept all night, or, you know, our kids, we got our babies coming in and the parents going, I was watching them on the monitor. I literally thought like the baby wasn't breathing because the baby hadn't slept all night. So all of those things start to happen. And it's really, I think for us as practitioners, we need to help all of you, the public, understand that those are really signs that the body is just changing its mind about the decisions it's making. And the decisions before weren't wrong, they were necessary. And as it changes its mind, it makes different decisions. And when we start to really appreciate and acknowledge that, we stop loathing or hating or feeling betrayed by what is actually happening, because we understand there is a biological set of laws that the body and the brain always follow.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And it is, I know, because, you know, both of us love Joe Dispenza. And one of the key things he always says, you know, you can, when you get into the state where things are starting to shift and you have more capacity for change, you start to understand the hierarchy and how your body works and all that kind of things. And one of the questions he always asks is like, is this loving to me?
I love that question. I love that question.
I talk word in the kitchen every day. It's just like, is this loving to me?
I love that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, the more that you are disconnected from or don't know, it's not always just disconnected. Sometimes we just don't know this really kind of pretty basic order that happens. The less you would ever think that any of your behavior would be disloyal to your body or not loving to your body. You would never imagine that because you don't even really realize what actually interferes with your brain making different decisions. And a lot of it, we're actually doing that, even beyond lifestyle choices. We're doing that by the way we think, by our emotional state, by the way we perceive the world. And unfortunately, in that looped kind of chronic pain or chronic disease pattern that the body gets in, we no longer have clarity anymore. And so it really is about finding our tribe of people around us and the right healthcare team and the right providers so that we can actually start to get some clarity on not just the broken parts, but also on anything that we're doing that isn't loving to us and what that actually looks like for you. Because what it looks like for you, it looks like different for me. It looks like different for men in my practice, my husband, our kids. It looks different for everybody. And so it's not a matter of doing what Maryellen does that's loving for her. It's a matter of you finding out what's loving for you and making those decisions. I'm a past addiction specialist, and we used to, you know, in the early part of recovery, for anybody who's recovered, it's all about what's happening the next minute, the next hour, and that day. And that it's not about what's going to happen in a week or 2 or 6 months. Because when you take something that has historically felt like it's out of your control, which for people, a lot of people think health is out of their control. They think they don't have any management of it. It's just going to happen to them. To bring it back into your locus of control, your internal locus of control, it's about today. It's about the minute. It's about the choices. And that awareness alone, I find even in our practice, just working with people, just having them just, it's not about what's going to happen tomorrow. It's about what's happening right now, today for you. And tomorrow we'll do that tomorrow. And then we'll do it the next day. And eventually those hours turn into days, those days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and years turn into years. But initially it's got to be super, super small steps, I think, for people.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to that capacity thing, that when people start down a pathway of thinking, they come in and they dump all their stuff on you. And you try to pick it apart and find the place to start. And they kind of get it. They're like, right, so what can I do at home? What can I do? This? I'm like, no, small steps.
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to do is build that little success pathway where every little step you start to realize that, oh, I did that. I couldn't do that yesterday. And then, the next day you reach for something to eat, and actually instead of a bag of crisps, it's an apple. And it becomes a natural thing that your body becomes drawn more to the things it needs to love itself, rather than being stuck in the groundhog day of, I'm just going to keep that inflammation cycle going because that's all I know.
Well, and that's a good point, because when people really sustainably change their behavior pattern, they have to replace it with something. You can't just, like, we get that all the time in practice. We're asking, well, what do I need to do? Like, tell me all the things that I need to do. And so the first question we ask is,
now, I'm going to do it right now in the next 5
yeah.
minutes.
Yeah. And so we always say, well, what are you currently doing? That's our first question. When somebody says, what do I need to do? We ask, what are you currently doing? And the answer almost 100% of the time is, well, nothing. So, okay. So the next question is, what are you willing to do? Not what do you need to do? What are you willing to start doing? Because that's a very different question than what do you need. We all, in my experience now, like, I can confidently say 99.9% of us, unless there is a social or neurological issue, know what we need to do to be on the very basic level physically healthy. And I mostly work with chiropractors today, and they could list off the list of things that they need to do. However, what are they willing to do is a different conversation, because it doesn't mean, because most people don't have, like you said, the internal capacity or the internal resource to do all of those things, because we do have really crazy lives and a lot of stuff that are dumped into our laps every day to handle. So it's not a key of adding more things. It's a key of replacing maybe something with something else. And then you're still doing the same thing, same time, same hours in your day. But like you said, it's not a crisp, it's an apple perhaps, or it's, the alarm, and we're not going to set the constant like beepers where, you sludgingly get up for 2 hours in the morning, right? So it's just little things like that are probably going to make more of a capacity for you to move forward than just trying to get a list of things to start doing, because really the reality is most people don't sustain that.
It's true. And actually with exercise, people are so funny because they think, well, I need to do this. I need to go to the gym. I'm like, well, do you like going to the gym? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, why set yourself up for failure, starting something that's not sustainable for you? What do you like to do? I like to take walks. I'm like, well, do it, go for, just speed up a little bit, and find the joy in the movement, because the more joy you find in the movement, you're willing to try other things and step outside your comfort zone. Maybe go hill climbing, or maybe go for a sea kayak, or if outdoors works for you, then find the things that you love to do, because otherwise it's just not sustainable to torture yourself doing something you hate, right? Which is that hate your body thing.
Exactly. And if you are in any kind of have to, not want to, that is what we hate. Everybody, like, you have to do something you don't want to do, like you dread it. And so what you want to do, and also I think it's giving you the permission as well to also say when you don't want to. And I really believe that a huge component of what we do with our people is we want them to be able to tell the truth. And the truth is, they say the truth shall set you free. That I literally could not think of a better thing to say than that particular saying, because anything that we keep that just is like lives in our body as big unsaid things just breeds. It breeds like a little like germy disease, and it just continues to live in there. And so we never say what we need to say, and we never say, I just don't want to. And I think we need to give permission as practitioners, people to say they don't want to. And I think that is very freeing for people, because that's the difference between fault and responsibility. And when you can take responsibility for what you are willing to do, and also if you're not willing to do it, you just say you don't want to, every choice has a consequence. And if you don't like the consequence, the great thing is you always have power over the choices that you make. So if you don't like the consequences, you can always change the choice. And it makes it really simple to look at it that way. But if you choose not to change the choice, then you're going to have a limited experience, especially with our office, to complain about the consequences, because
Right.
that just feeds that whole like, oh, I'm horrible, I'm crappy. No, you just didn't change the choice because you didn't want to. And that's okay, by the way. But just owning that, I think, for people is really, really important.
Yeah, I think so too. Because it's not like we can't tell, right? Because the minute we
No,
put our hands on somebody, we know
yeah,
whether they're
totally.
following through or not following through. Which is
Yeah.
really funny. So they know they can't get away with much, so they might as well just spill it. You
Yeah,
know.
I'm totally. And just say, and I'm always saying that all the time. Like, is this actually what's going on, or do you just not want it? And either way, I promise you, I'm going to be okay. Like, why we don't want to say certain things is either we've had an experience in the past where we have, and we've either been denied or abandoned or shut down, and now we've learned that we don't want to say anything, even though that's not what's happening right now. It's what we believe is our reality. And so then we don't say anything at all. But or we think it's going to affect the other person. And so this is where I think practitioners could get better at what they do, because we need to learn as practitioners not to take so much responsibility for people's own personal responsibility, and be okay with, as long as I've really believed in informed decision making for people. I believe if people have all the information and they still make the choice, kudos to them. My job is not to make them make a different decision,
No,
ever. There, if they feel like they have done what is in the best interest of themselves at the time or their family, that is the place that we stay. I'm happy with that. And that doesn't mean that decision has to be the same tomorrow. Perhaps tomorrow they'll change their mind, and I'm still okay with it, because it's not my life, it's their life. And so I think really reinforcing that for people also allows people to feel just more comfortable in saying what they need to say and doing what they need to do to make different choices, so that they do get different results as it relates to healing.
because I think part of that too is that empowerment cycle, where again you come back into those small steps where people have been kind of trained in a different system to not think about it, to do what they're told, and just get on with it, as opposed to actually let's just sit and think about this, because this is your life and your decision, and what you're creating here might not be what you think you're creating. So let's just talk about that and then what comes next. And it's interesting because I think when people are empowered to make those choices and to voice, like, well, I don't know if I can do that, or I won't do that exercise, or, I want to do this, I want to do that, but I can't do that because somebody won't let me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, it comes back to that. The other meme on the other side about the greatest rebellion is actually that self-knowledge and that self-awareness. Because I think when you're a bit more grounded in that, you increase your capacity again to actually look for those things that are loving to you, which is a conversation people don't even have
No,
self ever.
no. And honestly, to be fair to a lot of people who are in that cycle from the back to the hierarchy, the biological hierarchy, is that when you are in that systemized looped pattern where the brain is just reflexively telling the body, dude, you better back up, back out, and stop. Because if you continue forward, there's something's going to happen. Even if it's not, right? I really veer away in our office today about talking about the word stress. Because stress has been so bastardized to such a degree that we think it's about stress management, emotional stress. And, we have typically, this is not all the time, but for a lot of our male patients, stress doesn't make sense to them from that perspective, that word stress. So we really are looking to show people that reflexive fear response that really drives a lot of our physiology, when they're in that, you don't actually have any awareness. And so even from the practitioner's perspective in our office, we're not even capable to have that conversation with somebody or able to have that conversation until they can hear it when that reflexive response dials down. Because then, of course, what happens is the body makes different decisions. And so those of you that have had chronic pain, disease processes, chronic illness, and somebody were to say to you, is that loving to you? You probably feel like taking their head off. So I just think back in the days where I was really, really chronically ill. And if somebody would have said that to me, I'd have been like, in my mind, I was doing everything I needed to do, but my body was just betraying me. And it would take me to physically feel better first, which meant I had to dial that system down so my brain could actually calm my system, because the system can't heal in that reflexive fear response to heal. And then I could hear it for what it was. But early on, if somebody would have said that, so if you heard that and that sort of gave you a bit of a trigger, which I know it will for some people, that's all that's happening. Is it just the brain is just, nobody cares about loving yourself when you are in that state of either that chronic breakdown or chronic disease pattern. And you do have to start to feel a bit physically better. But the real long-term work, I believe, comes in what we're talking about, is really that work around not even mindset, it's around our body awareness and how much of that is driving the way we view the choices that we make.
And then it comes back to that willingness. What are you willing to do?
Yes.
And with a lot of the chronic things that are going on too, I think, particularly in the society and the way people are raised, there's a pill for everything. So why isn't it working? But so when you come to the end of that road and you need to start facing something different and looking at different alternatives, which means turning the mirror inside, that freaks people out quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of chronic conditions, nothing changes until you change.
Right.
Right. And for whatever that means for that person in that given time. So, because I know with your background, with all of the things that you went through, you did get to that point.
Yeah.
But people are incredibly unkind to themselves and impatient with themselves. And that level of self-loathing and that hatred that comes from, I should have been better already.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing everything. I've been the healthiest person. Then I had a virus and now I've got post-viral stuff. Why isn't my body healing faster?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of compounds itself. But they haven't come out of that stress loop. They're still in that stress loop where they're still driving in the same way they drove, kind of like driving on a nice summer day versus driving with 10 foot of snow on the road, with the same mindset. You can't drive your body that way with the same mindset for healing. It's got to shift. You've got to give yourself the grace, really, to allow your body its little hierarchy to kind of do the things it needs to do, given the support that it has. Because you're right, it's your body is doing everything it needs to do to protect itself, to survive.
Well, in post, I think a lot of folks over this last year, where really life was pulled out from underneath their feet, the way in which we sort of mindlessly went about our lives for a lot of people, all of a sudden became very mindful, in the sense that there wasn't the ability for a lot of people anymore to be running around outside of their homes per se. So they turned inward, and a lot of families, of course, then the crazy became in their homes. So I didn't see a change in mindfulness. I just saw a shift of the busy that we have in our lives that takes us away from body awareness. So the more outside your life is, and the busier it is, and the more focus you have on anything other than what it feels like to be inside your body, the more the body breaks down without you being aware of it, until it's so far gone. I always say to our practice members, this was just the day it had enough. It's had enough for some time. This is the day you listen to it and said, oh, where did that come from? I just woke up that way. No, you actually didn't. And if we were to retrace back a lot of our steps back, either months or years, for most people it's years, it was warning you for some time. You just were busy. So I didn't see what we'd hoped. I think early on, March, April, we thought, everybody's at home and they're shifting their priorities and people are going to become a little more mindful. But what we observed really for a lot of our families was it just shifted to being in their house. So now they were homeschooling kids where they never had to do that before. They were working from home. So parents had like desks set up in living rooms and the kids had their desks, and people are the same busy, except that they now can't leave one another. So yeah, the same feeling in four walls, which in some ways, for a lot of people, they said it was worse. And I contend it was the same. It was just more obvious, because when you can spread yourself thin around driving kids to activities and driving to work and coming home and, driving for suppers, and a lot of this, like, our partners, we pass like ships in the night. We don't see one another because we're running around. Now you couldn't do that, but it was still there. And so I think I believe that over the next 10 years, the beauty of this time for many people will be this mindfulness that still has not come yet around what it feels like to have everything stripped away, what's left. And what's left is, of course, your families are there. And of course, things that are important to you are still there. But I really believe that our evolution of healing has to be this ability for us to know what it feels like to be in our bodies. And I cannot tell you how many people I ask that question to. I ask it to our people. I ask it to chiropractors who have postgrads and graduate degrees. These are brilliant, brilliant practitioners. And very few people can describe what they feel like inside their body. And when you cannot describe that, you don't have an awareness of what is going on. And when you have no awareness, the body will break it down and break it down because you're disconnected from it. And I believe a huge component of the chronic disease process is trying to get people back into their body so that we can heal. But as long as you are disconnected, you are in that hatred, loathing, betrayal mindset, it's very hard to heal. It's not impossible. It's just much more complicated.
Oh, yeah, you're fighting yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're kind of wasting an awful lot of healing energy fighting yourself when actually you could just be listening.
Yes.
Nurturing.
And I sometimes get this from patients and also chiropractors. Well, I'm supposed to be happy about this. So I just want to clarify when we talk about this. No, there also there also has to be an acceptance of the frustration that comes. And I'm saying this all the time to practitioners. I totally understand the frustration. Like I'm not even saying that I get it because I don't get it. I do get it. I get what it takes to spend years running around to specialists and trying to get somebody to give you an answer as to why this is happening. And it also takes years to get to a point where you realize that most people will never know why it's happening, because the body is not A plus B equals C. The body is A plus B equals C, D, E, F, G, H, I, that's the body. And so it is an unrealistic, expectation to expect that somebody is going to be able to tell you, especially when we're in a chronic cumulative breakdown process. So I'm not talking about that you fell off a roof and hurt yourself. I'm talking about where most people are is this chronic cumulative breakdown process. And you're never really going to get the answer that you're looking for, because we want somebody to tell us why. And sometimes it's probably a better use of our energy to look at not why did this happen, but why is this happening for me? And how can I reframe what I'm doing to really look at that and still acknowledge the frustration? Because I really do understand it. You can't just pretend you're not frustrated. And I don't want people to pretend they're happy when they feel terrible. But it is, you can actually learn to reframe that frustration and anger into something more productive when you're in that state, and that you can learn that. That's a skill that you can learn.
Yeah, it's such an important skill, because again, like, it's showing that kindness to yourself again. And the conversation is often like, would you treat your child who's come home feeling like this the same way? Of course you wouldn't. So why are you speaking to yourself like that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a simple concept, but people are always shocked. Like, well, of course I wouldn't speak to so and so. I'm like, well, yeah, but that's how you're speaking to yourself every day, all day. No wonder
Absolutely.
you're exhausted.
And I think that one of my big learnings I never knew in my early 20s when I was so ill, I never knew that our emotional our emotions, so the way that we feel, had actually a chemistry to
Yeah.
them. And so that is such a basic concept that I never knew that. I never knew that until I knew it. And so I really feel that a lot of people don't even know that the way some of those emotions, and there's lots of them. And actually, when I ask people how they feel, they can't give me the number one answer. And I've asked this thousands of times now, just for fun. And I ask it with all my coaching clients at the end of a call, and I ask them, how do you feel? And the number one word, what do you think they tell me?
I don't know.
Good.
Oh, good. Fine. Good.
Good. And 100 times out of 100, they say good. And 100 times out of 100, I say, that's not a feeling. And then they have to search for a feeling. And most people don't know what they're feeling. And this is not even a time of strain or stress. These are people that are pretty connected. We're not doing anything scary at that time, and they can't source a feeling, which tells me there is a feeling, but they're not aware of it. And I did not know that all of those feelings come with this chemistry to the body, and that it actually, you can study that. You can study the way the brain works when we have these emotions, whether it's shame or frustration or anger or love and forgiveness. And there's different chemistry that goes along with that, which means our body feels differently. So if we know that, then if we're in a chronic pattern of breakdown, and on top of that, we have these emotions that are chemistry orientated, and there's stress chemistry associated with it, which job biologically is to break the body down so it can get more energy to keep moving. Then we've got this is why we have this cumulative effect. And I think that's what we're talking about is in order to break apart this cumulative effect, we also have to start to identify what are some of those emotions. I mean, of course, that's why we love Joe so much. I mean, he just digs into this in heavy duty manner. If you've never done any of his work, I mean, you can do as simple or as complex as you want with him. But it just, that understanding really for people, it's stunning to them because they just had never heard that that's actually part of the problem or part of the solution.
And it's both.
Yeah.
That recognition and awareness. Yeah, because it is like learning a new language, which is weird because you've been in your body for as long as you've been in your body.
Right. Exactly. How weird is that? And you know, we don't have time for this, but we grow up just learning that, right? So we grow up learning to be disconnected from our bodies, and we learn it from our parents, we learn it from our culture, we learn it from our medical system, we learn it from practitioners we see, teachers. Like we learn it. It is such a cultural phenomenon. Not all cultures, but for sure Western culture and Western ideology and European ideology is really very separate from our bodies. And I mean, certainly if you go back to, you know, ancient China, and even today, I love acupuncture and the history of acupuncture. And, you know, I used to see an acupuncturist, and she did a study in China. And so she went and followed all these acupuncturists around. And in some of the small, this is even today, like 7 years ago, I think, she went to some of these small villages in China, and they did major surgery with acupuncture only because they did not have access to general anesthetic. So if you really want to stress your mind, start thinking about that. How is that possible that they can disconnect the brain from feeling the body, or vice versa? To do major surgery on people with just acupuncture. She said her as an acupuncturist who studied this and went, you know, and graduated and practiced, went there, and just even for her, it was beyond mind blowing for her to observe that. So, you know, I think that there's lots of mechanisms for us to look at that belief system is simply not true. But it is what we believe because we've been really taught that way from a very young age. And so I think until it doesn't work for us anymore, we just keep believing it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it is that rolling soft swell that is starting to see change in that, thankfully, you know, over periods of time, that we aren't that separate mind, body, and spirit. We are recognizing that each one of those has a vital role to play in every expression that we have.
Yeah, and I think for the key for most of us, or who are not maybe at the very end stage, but if you've ever been in any you know, a lot of the chronic pain programs and even a lot of the cancer, post-cancer support programs, there's a reason that they have introduced either social work or psychology into those programs. And the reason that they've done that is they recognize that we've treated the body like a mechanical piece of equipment. And there's actually been a huge failure rate with that. So not that that isn't important, but that's not it. And so when we've only shown sort of through our, I love some of the post-cancer stuff, because especially here we have a big research center and we have some patients that have gone through the program and they've done chemo or they've had surgery, and still the oncologist has said that you cannot stop with this, because this is not just a piece that I've pulled out or I've radiated to death. We have got to get you to heal. I'm like, hallelujah. So I love that, because it makes some credibility in a world where sometimes if you haven't been in that system, it seems a little bit far-fetched. And I think that's really, really cool that they're starting to do that for our people at the far end. We're trying to get people before that.
Yes.
And trying to get people to, we don't want people to experience it at that point. We'd like people to experience it long before they get to that point.
So just in wrapping things up, what would you say would be the greatest acts of rebellion for looking after yourself?
Well, that's such a good question. The greatest, I wanted to say like some kind of meme that personal development says, like, take care of self first. You can't pour from the empty cup.
Brandy. I just want Brandy.
What else is a good one? But the greatest act of, I believe the greatest act of rebellion when caring for yourself is to start to identify who you are inside your body. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? When you are not running around, and when you are not overwhelmed with life, and when you are not doing a bunch of other things, and if the first thing that comes to your head is that never happens, then that's where I would start, is for you to really feel like, I used to do this as a kid. I used to lay in bed and I used to be like, who am I? And I used to wonder why I did that. And I was literally like 8, 9, 10. I was little. And I would touch my body because I didn't really know. I felt disconnected. I was disassociated from what I felt like inside my body. And sometimes that happens from trauma, and sometimes it just happens with the busyness of life, and we disassociate ourselves from our body. And you can't disassociate. Your body is moving you through this life. It is allowing you to do everything that you are doing right now. It has allowed you to capture every joyful activity you've ever done in your life. It's allowed you to survive every traumatic activity you've ever had in your life. So it's worth it. And rebellious because it's weird enough to think about and feel what you feel like inside your body on a day-to-day basis. Because when you have that awareness, what happens is it builds more awareness. And the more awareness you have, the less likely you are to let that body go to such a state of oblivion that the cleanup is just so hard, that you're more likely to catch things faster. You're more likely to take care of it when it needs to be taken care of it. And you're less likely to really do any kind of self-loathing behaviors where you're actually destroying it even more. So, but you can't do that unless you don't know what you feel like. So I would say that is the biggest act of rebellion in self-care.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, no shortage of like golden.
No. That's why I said to Maryellen, tell me how long I go. I could go on and on and on. So we better stop before I go on and on and on.
Well, there can always be a part 2, Brandi.
Oh, that's true. We could do that for sure.
I would look forward to that. I'm going to hold you to that.
Awesome. For sure. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that, for sharing everything. And I might actually have to go back and do a transcript.
Awesome.
Everything that we've said, because there's amazing things that have come out actually. So I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.